We're living in a time of absolute information overload. The week that I'm recording this video, one of the US president's staff is being convicted of serious crimes, while another has been taken into custody and is currently telling the world about the crimes that he committed on behalf of the president. Also, my state is on fire, and Pokemon Go just released a new update, and there are hop-ups everywhere. That's just a random selection of the things on my mind today. My point is that through all of this, I nearly completely missed a huge fucking story. So huge that I spent some time researching it to make sure it was really happening because I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of it prior. And it's not because major news sites haven't covered it. It's just that there's so much going on that this one nearly slipped through the cracks for me, and I don't want it to slip through the cracks for you. Saudi Arabia has arrested 5 human rights activists, including women's rights activist Isra al-Ghanam. I'm sorry if I've butchered her name. And they're considering the death penalty for all of them. They've been in custody for 2 years, and in October, a judge will determine whether or not to behead these people for peacefully protesting. The charges are things like participating in protests, filming protests, and chanting slogans. Al-Ghanam is in the spotlight in particular because she would be the first women's rights activist to be executed by the state. And that would set a precedent for the dozen other women who have recently been rounded up for similar crimes. And not to mention any future women's rights champions who they decide to arrest. If you can believe it, it actually gets worse. Canada is pushing back on the Saudis, as they should, stating in no uncertain terms that Saudi Arabia should release the activists. Chrystia Freeland, the Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs, announced that Canada will always stand up for the protection of human rights, including women's rights and freedom of expression around the world, which is exactly the kind of position that you want your government to take. Unfortunately, it's not the position my own government is taking, because they're a bunch of garbage human beings that should be out on the streets, not in our congressional halls. This week, the U.S. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said, "It's up for the government of Saudi Arabia and the Canadians to work this out." To work out whether or not peaceful human rights activists should be beheaded. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that the U.S. has been supportive of Saudi Arabia since the 1940s, when Saudi Arabia promised to keep that delicious oil flowing in exchange for the U.S. staying out of these little human rights kerfuffles like this. And I'm sure that it's just a coincidence that Russia has publicly backed Saudi Arabia on this issue, the issue of literally beheading peaceful human rights activists. The UK hasn't been much better, urging restraint for both Canada and Saudi Arabia. Sure, because fucking Canada isn't showing restraint. Hey, Canada, we know that stereotypically you Canadians really fly off the handle all the time, so try to just cool it. Oh, and you too, Saudi Arabia. Could you just show a little restraint when you behead those peaceful activists? I mean, besides the restraints you'll be using to hold a woman down while you chop her head off for asking for basic human rights. So yeah, it's all pretty fucked up. And I don't have an answer for this right now. Call your congressional representatives, I guess. I don't know. I'm pretty beaten down at this point. I found a change.org petition, which currently has 199 signers. So I guess you could go sign that, link below. Or we could storm Washington, D.C. and overthrow our corrupt, disgusting government and try to replace it with something with an ounce of humanity. Yeah, I think that's pretty much, those are the only options I've got. Sorry.